Well, today we finish our venture through the book of Hosea. Obviously, we look at excerpts, which we're doing on the daily mass, and next week we're going into Isaiah. We're going to be in Isaiah 1. So we're looking at the powerful reading that's talking. It's important to look at this because if you read this just as some kind of a historical document, you're going to miss the point. Imagine this is the Lord speaking to you and calling you to a deeper relationship with Him. Or maybe you have strayed from the Lord and He's calling you back. And remember what we were saying earlier in this week. The Lord is constantly calling us back. So those people who give you the impression that the Lord will just cast you away, and that happens. People actually believe that. I've dealt with people who just say, no, God will have nothing to do with me. I've told the story about one particular case, which I won't tell here, have nothing to do with me. People believe that. Yet the scriptures remind us that the Lord is always calling us back. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is every church teaching is rooted in the scriptures. So if someone says to you, which I've heard people say this, that you can come to a point where God will give up on you and leaving you with the impression that you can be so bad that God will never accept you, even if you repent, that doesn't match the scriptures. Now, we do understand what happened with Israel. Israel, right to the very end, refused, which also is Catholic teaching on hell. Remember, we were talking about that earlier. But remember, it's an obstinate refusal, which is what we see here. And I'm going to read through it in a few minutes. But understand that. So God's mercy is constant, and God is always interactive to call you back. It's pretty powerful. I've had situations where people, and we hear historically of stories like that, people who refuse to have anything to do with God. And then, on the deathbed, they say, okay, I guess I need all the prayers I can get. And you bring them, for example, the sacrament of the sick. And this is something that Cardinal O'Malley taught during a chrism mass one time, one of my favorite teachings of his. And that is that when you die and you get up to heaven, you will find people there who will be that you will be surprised are there. And they may be surprised you are there. And what he cited was the important element was the what we call the sacrament of the sick and the last rites. They're two different sacraments, by the way. They're the same sacrament, but they're two different styles. You do it one way when someone is sick, and you do it another way when you're doing the last rites. They're extremely similar, but there is, for example, an apostolic pardon, which is given when someone is getting the last rites. Receiving the last rites. Pardon my vulgar way of talking sometimes, not bad words, but, but you're receiving the last rites. And then when someone is sick, prayer is a little different, so two styles. And with the apostolic pardon and everything else. But in any case, that message of forgiveness is always there. And that's the important thing. Even we're going to be talking more about Bishop Paprocki's teaching on funerals, where in the second half of the program, we even see in the sacrament of the sick, we obviously see it in the sacrament of reconciliation, we see it in the Mass, and we see it in the funeral Mass, this constant appeal to God's mercy. As a matter of fact, a funeral Mass is a prayer on behalf of someone, for the mercy of God. So we do that all the time, which is why when someone says, oh, no, certain people shouldn't receive funerals, sorry, that's not Catholic teaching. And the person who you might believe should not receive a funeral is the one who needs a funeral more. That's just the way it goes. But we always, that's the interesting thing about funerals. And it's all rooted in this message that we see here. Now, we do know that ancient Israel, to its very end, said, nope, we reject God's mercy, and was wiped out by the Assyrians. But that's the lesson to take yourself. If you reject God's mercy to the very end, then you've rejected God's mercy. There is nothing you can do about it, or he can do about it. There's a painting. It's the famous painting of Divine Mercy, and I point out, if you look very carefully at the painting, if you can find it, you'll see a painting of Jesus, and there he is, but behind Jesus, in all the mercy that he has to offer, in this appeal to mercy, behind Jesus, there's nothing but darkness. Because if you reject the mercy at that spot, there is nothing beyond that. There's nothing there, because to the ultimate end, you rejected God's mercy. People don't do that. People don't do that. There are fascinating cases where people have been in that position. One of my one fascinating case is the case of Eugene O'Neill. Eugene O'Neill was basically an atheist most of his life, but on his deathbed, he asked for a priest, but he was, I guess, living with, I don't know if he was married to her, but living with a companion, and the companion was a staunch atheist. And so when the priest came to the door, she refused to let him in. Fascinating stuff. But we priests have ways to work around that. The priest could have easily have done the apostolic pardon or the words of absolution quietly on the other side of the door, and no one would know. So there were different things we could do. There's a famous story of hijacking that happened many years ago, and this was back during the beginning years of the Iranian hostage crisis. And there was a priest on board one of these planes that were hijacked, and eventually I think most of the people got rescued. But he said that he did a blanket absolution for all the patients all the passengers on the plane. So this kind of mercy, this call of mercy, is always there, and that's what we see in the reading. God is calling them back. So let's read through it. This is from Hosea chapter 14, and we're going to go to where is Hosea here? Here we go, chapter 14, and it's verses 2 through 10. So let's read this through. Chapter 14, which is the last chapter. Israel, convert to the Lord your God, for you have been ruined by your own iniquity. Take these words with you and return to the Lord, and say to him, remove all iniquity and accept the good, and we will repay the calves of our lips. Assur will not save us. We will not ride on horses, neither will we say any more, the works of our hands are God's. For those that are in you will have mercy on the orphan. Now notice that. The works of our hands are God. When someone commits idolatry and starts worshiping something that is an image of some kind of God, they're actually putting together a subconscious image of themselves. So they're appealing to themselves, and then obviously the dark side of themselves comes out. I will heal their contrition. I will love them spontaneously, for my wrath has been turned away from them. I will be like the dew. Israel will spring forth like the lily, and his root will spread out like that of the cedars of Lebanon. His branches will advance, and his glory will be like the olive tree, and his fragrance will be like that of the cedars of Lebanon. They will be converted, sitting in his shadow. They will live on wheat. They will grow like a vine. His memorial will be like the wine of the cedars of Lebanon. Ephraim will say, what are idols to me anymore? I will listen to him, and I will set him straight like a healthy spruce tree. Your fruit has been found by me. Who is wise and who will understand this? Who has understanding will know these things? For the ways of the Lord are straight, and the just will walk in them, but truly the traitors will fall in them. The ways of the Lord are straight, meaning, of course, they're not crooked, they are straight. Keeping that in mind. So whenever you go to confession, you can always remember that. This is what the Lord promises when we repent and turn to the Lord. This is the whole promise of the sacraments. This is the whole promise, staying close to the Lord. This is why the sacraments are so important, because it's God reaching out and calling us back. So again, I know I emphasize this a lot, but don't listen to these people who put all the effort on you and make you believe that you have to work really hard, otherwise God is not going to save you, and very few people are saved. That's not the message of the Scriptures. Those who turn to the Lord will be saved. Those who reject the Lord to the very end will be not. That's the message of the Scriptures, and that's the message. And remember, our Catholic teaching has to be rooted in the Scriptures. So if someone says something that is not rooted in the Scriptures, it's not Catholic teaching. So keep that in mind. And so we look at all of that in the power of what this reading has to be. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Subscribe and like. Have you ever wanted to read the Bible but didn't know which readings to check out? Well, how about looking at the Church's daily readings? You can find them at the website of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Just go to bible.usccb.org and click on the date that pops up on that page. There are other options on that page as well. That is bible.usccb.org, and click on the date and you will see the daily readings for your own prayer and study of the Bible. This is a prayerful tip from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. So we've been talking this week about the video from Bishop Paprocki about how funerals will now be celebrated. And what I said yesterday at the end of the program, which is really helpful, is that he has put out this video. This is my instruction. And so when someone comes and they say, well, why can't, like, for example, why can't Billy Joe do the eulogy, which is what our family planned? You can say, this is the instructions of the bishop. I have to follow those instructions, and otherwise, if you have any issues, you can call the bishop's office. You know, which, and that's the way it works. Now, there's something interesting that someone brought up the other day, and it may even cite on one of the issues that can happen with eulogies. So, first of all, this was the case where the eulogy happened at the end of the Mass, which is, you know, when I've done funerals and they have eulogies, it's always at the beginning of the Mass, and there's a lot of reasons for it. And, you know, so in any case, apparently they had a eulogy, very nice eulogy at the end of the Mass. And so the eulogist walks off the altar and another person comes onto the altar. Well, sanctuary is the actual word, sanctuary, and goes to where the eulogist was and begins to roast the person, you know, making jokes and using vulgar language, real vulgar language, cuss words and stuff in this. And, you know, what I heard is the widow was mortified when this happened, a real terrible situation. That's a danger that can happen as well. And so, you know, you see some of these things, and I've had issues where I've spoken to people, and they'll go, "Oh, why are these rules? Why?" we're going to say something that you don't like. And then I told you yesterday, I cite the absolutely worst eulogy, shortest and worst eulogy I ever heard. And they just go, oh. And that's the end of it. They okay, we'll do what you say. And they just shocked. But, you do what I suppose the bishop is doing is you want to make sure that the funeral is glorifies God, is prayer for the deceased, respects the deceased and the dignity of the deceased, regardless of who he or she is, respects the family, and all of that coming together. Now, and you don't want anything that's going to make a mockery of any part of that. There was a story someone related to me a long time ago where a person went up to do the first reading. And the first reading is in the Old Testament. I think it was probably something from Sirach or something like that, or Proverbs, or I don't remember what the first reading. And the person just started the line and says, well, obviously this person doesn't know who Joe is. And instead of doing the reading, starts doing his own eulogy about Joe. And these problems happen, and then they become real problems for the family and the funeral director and everything else. As a matter of fact, in that particular case where that person came up and started roasting the family, and they got very upset with the priest, but that would have been the funeral director's responsibility. Because the funeral director directs the funeral basically from the time the family arrives to arrange everything to actually the church. Now, in the church, they'll follow the rules of the particular parish, but they also make sure everything goes well in the funeral. So, that's it's clear shouldn't happen. Now, one of the more controversial things, one of the fascinating things that was there is you have the wake service and you have the prayers of the wake service. Well, what Bishop Paprocki said is you have to have the prayers that are done at the wake service, whether or not there is a wake service. So if the family does not want a wake service, and it has to be done in the funeral home, doesn't want a wake service in the funeral home, right? The priest still has to go, the priest or deacon still has to go to the funeral home and do the prayers, even if he is, because it's prayers, even if he's speaking to an empty room where the only person with quotations is in the room is actually the deceased person. That's according to Bishop Paprocki. Those prayers have to be done the night before the funeral. And so that was an interesting thing. Sometimes people will have, it brings up another question. Sometimes people will have the wake service before the funeral. And he said, no. If they want to do a wake service before the funeral, it has to be in the funeral home. It cannot be in the church. And again, this is only in Springfield, Illinois. And the prayers for the wake service still have to be done the night before, even if no one's at the wake service. So that's an interesting question that pops up. That's another one of his instructions. And that's important because I have had wake services in the church, which he said, no, you can't have wake services in the church in the Diocese of Springfield, Illinois, because the procession to the church the morning of the funeral is part of the funeral rite. I've had wake services in the church, mostly for immigrant families, because after the funeral, there is the committal service, but the committal service is going to happen in another country. So after the funeral, and usually that's all done at night, you have the funeral at night, and then the body with casket, obviously inside the casket, obviously is taken to the airport, and especially when I was working in Central with Central Americans, and the airline that handled that the most, according to this funeral director, was Taka Air. And there's all kinds of different rules you have to follow because it's an international flight, so it involves customs and everything else on 2 countries and everything else. But it's all done. Everything's done at night. I don't know if you can do that in the Diocese of Springfield, Illinois. So, real interesting. And ultimately, it's about bringing the dignity of what a funeral actually is and bringing the dignity to number one, what a funeral actually is and the dignity of the person and everything else. Now, someone brought up to me that there's a funeral director who will discourage people if they don't have the money from going to the church. Our priority is doing a funeral mass. And if you don't have the money, if you have someone who doesn't have the money for a funeral mass, it's always been my policy, and I'm sure it's virtually every other pastor at least in the Archdiocese of Boston, then we'll do it for free. Maybe you can't have the singers. Maybe the singers have to be paid, or maybe you don't have singers. But the fact that to say, well, you can't afford a funeral mass, then obviously we can't do one. No. And apparently this funeral director says, no, here's what I'll do. I'll give you a special deal, and you don't have to do the mass. That's okay. Well, if I was pastor and I found I've pulled this stunt before. If I was pastor and I found out a funeral director did that, I would make it a policy that we no longer take funerals from that funeral director. I would absolutely make it a policy. And I have done things like that, which usually gets the funeral director to change. What? Wait, you can't. What? Wait. Oh, yes, I can. Have yourself a good day. That would be my policy. And right on the spot. We had an issue with a funeral director who's now deceased. Who, what would happen is he'd do cremations, and the family would show up at our door. They'd just say, well, we'd like a funeral. They just gave us the ashes, and the ashes were in a cardboard box, obviously in a plastic lining, a cardboard box in a local supermarket shopping bag. And I'd say, you just came from this particular funeral director. Thank God they no longer exist. And I'm like, yeah, we'll do a funeral. Don't worry about the money. We'll take care of it. These things happen in funerals. They're amazing. And obviously Bishop Paprocki is trying to put an end to all of that. We'll be back right after this.
Did you know that Catholic TV offers free apps for both Android and iOS users? Visit the website catholictv.com or your app store to download this faith resource to your device. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. Well, next week we go into the prophet Isaiah. Let me see. We've got Monday, the prophet Isaiah. Very beginning of the prophet Isaiah, where it's in chapter 1, verse 10. Hear the words of the Lord, princes of Sodom. That's the one I always say. When you hear those words, you can go, that's trouble. When he calls us Sodom, that's not a good thing. So that's what we're going to see in Isaiah. We're going to see, obviously, the beginning of Isaiah. If you've listened to the program long enough, you know that Isaiah actually represents 3 writers. The first part, the second part, which is after the 49th chapter, and then the third part, which is towards the end. And anyway, we're going to be back on Monday. Have yourself a blessed day, and we will see you then.
Yeah, you know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the Greatest Act of Defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The Greatest Act of Defiance podcast. That's right, the Greatest Act of Defiance. Word up. Word up.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.